Next speaker is Professor Fran Tyler. And students, make sure you ask questions, okay? Later.
Thanks. Good afternoon. In looking at the other members of this panel, I was struck that there's not been this much social work intelligence assembled in one place since Jane Addams dined by herself in Hull House. As everyone knows, I plan to use some humor in my response and pretend that the next two pictures you see of this good-looking guy are me. When I first learned that Dr. Epstein's would be making a presentation on clinical data mining, and I would be asked to provide some comments on it, I was pleased and intrigued and looked forward to reading it. Then I read it. And again, I'm responding to the written paper we were provided as well as his PowerPoint, not as much more temperate remarks from this morning. Well, seeking reliability checks, I asked my wife to read it. Well, I thought about it, and coolly and calmly, I decided to plan my response. For a number of years, Dr. Epstein has advocated a research strategy he's labeled clinical data mining. And it's a variant of secondary data analysis, except it uses data not collected for research purposes, but for agency, clinical, and administrative purposes. It's a very fine approach. You can use clinical data mining for descriptive studies, retrospective predictor studies, correlational investigation, needs assessments, pre-experimental designs like pre and post, and also quasi-experimental outcome studies. Properly conducted, these can be of tremendous value in the social, behavioral, and health science fields. And the accumulated evidence of clinical data mining and other non-experimental evidence may indeed permit causal inferences if there's enough evidence gathered over enough time consistently pointing in a particular direction, as in the link between smoking and cancer. He deserves every credit for proactively presenting this method of research within the social work profession. CDM was apparently a new development to Dr. Epstein. Here's some quotes that he says where he's developed and promoted it for over a decade. He discovered it, and he's introduced clinical data mining into social work and other and allied health professions. In some emails I had with him over the last week or two, I described some of my publications where I thought I was using what he was talking about, and I asked him to confirm if these were indeed legitimate examples of clinical data mining. And he says, the studies you describe are perfect examples of what I call clinical data mining in every possible account. And he goes on to say why. So I was pleased about that. Two of the studies I described, this first one here was a descriptive study on the ages of onset of DSM anxiety disorders using retrospectively gathered data at an anxiety disorders clinic I was working at with hundreds of files where people had provided their age of onset of their condition, and I broke them out by different types of anxiety disorders, and I published this in a decent psychiatric journal. And this is the most highly cited paper I've ever written in my life. It's got like 180 citations, which is absolutely huge. The modal number of citations for any research paper is like 0. Not mine, everybody's. And then another one I did was an analysis of appointment keeping for prenatal care for high-risk women in rural Georgia, published in the Journal of Family Social Work. It was a quasi-experimental study looking at the birth outcomes of women who made a whole lot of prenatal appointments versus those who didn't. Again, it was not an experiment. We just looked at exact existing natural agency data. And we found out that the more appointments you made, the better the birth outcomes were. The babies were older when they were born. In terms of gestational age, they had a better APGAR score, head circumference, length, things like that. So, what I conclude is the approach he's talking about as clinical data mining has actually been around for over 50 years. It's a regular research strategy in conventional scientific inquiry. It's not at all new to behavioral science, nor is it new to social work. I mean, if I was doing it in '85, that's quite a while ago. And I picked up an old copy of Curlinger, and he has a whole chapter on what he calls ex post facto research, which seems to be simply the same thing by a different name. So I think it's a bit overreach to talk about discovering it or bringing it to the attention of social work, but in reality it's been around for a long time. Every credit for promoting it, that's a good idea. I promote single subject designs, have been doing it for 30 years, but I don't say I discovered them or invented them or anything like that. It's still a good service to talk about this research methodology, but be a little more circumspect in the claims made regarding origins. And in any way, I think that clinical data mining is old wine in the new bottle. It's a very good wine, but it's not new. Rather than limiting himself to a positive presentation of clinical data mining, he also opted to include some, I think, gratuitous criticisms of two endeavors I've long been affiliated with. One, the Society for Social Work and Research. Janet Williams is the founder, and she assembled half a dozen people to form the first board, and I was one of the people she reached out to. So I helped found SWIR. So when people make critical remarks about SWIR, I'm concerned about that. I also conceived of the idea of the journal Research on Social Work Practice, and working alone, I found a commercial publisher willing to invest in starting up the new periodical. And with the help of a very able series of editorial boards over the last 2 decades, it built the journal up to its present state. Here's some specific claims that Dr. Epstein made in his written paper. He says that he focused on anti-practitioner utterances and EVP writings, most typically those published in RSWP. Well, I'm a practitioner. I have lots of practitioners on my board and publish and so forth. Talks about RSWP and SWIR's big structural barriers to practitioner research collaboration. And he talks about his colleagues who won't submit their work to SWIR or to the journal because of the ideological and methodological narrowness of the EVP mission. And he talks that RSWP has been slow to publish qualitative research, mixed methods and case studies and so forth and so on. That we're preaching dogmatically to the converted and utterly alienated social work practitioners. That's sort of strong stuff. I was surprised to hear myself and my activities described in such a negative manner. From these remarks, one might envision me as looking somewhat like this. Or perhaps like this. When in reality, as you all know, I'm like this. We must be the change we wish to be. I'm a social work practitioner, I'm a social work researcher, I want to promote these things, so I start a journal. I helped start an organization that would welcome practitioners. Let's put down the pipe and look at reality here. Let's take a look at the actual editorial policy of Research on Social Work Practice, which appears in every issue of the journal. It's a disciplinary journal, and we're devoted to the publication of articles pertaining to assessment methods and the outcomes of social work practice. That's all. It serves as an outlet for the publication of 3 types of studies. Original reports of empirically based evaluation studies on the outcomes of practice. Original reports on psychometric validation studies of assessment methods that can be used. And then meta-analyses and systematic reviews of interventions in social work or of the reliability of outcome measures and so forth. And the journal specifically says, if your paper is in one of these categories, don't send it to RSWP. Our editorial policy clearly states that we welcome research from a variety of ideological and interpretive theories, and we welcome quantitative or qualitative approaches as our interdisciplinary works. We welcome replication studies. We welcome studies with failure and negative results. We also say authors are encouraged to submit only research of the highest quality. The submission of seriously flawed or marginal studies is discouraged. We're very blunt and upfront about this. I talked about what are inappropriate submissions to the journal. Again, this is in every issue. Don't send us surveys, program descriptions, theoretical, philosophical, or conceptual works, correlational investigations, retrospective predictor studies, methodological articles, descriptive studies, or needs assessments, which is almost everything that we do in social work research. And we also say that research articles must conform to accepted standards of conventional quantitative or qualitative scientific inquiry. And we use the AP style guidelines very closely. Why this narrow focus? Well, back in the early 90s, very few journals published much in the way of empirical research. Most of the empirical research was not about practice, and most of the practice research articles back then were pretty low quality, and some high quality research had very little applications to practice. Many journals have a focus. For example, you wouldn't send a randomized control trial to a journal called Qualitative Social Work, or you wouldn't send a gerontological paper to the Mental Health Journal. This enables these journals to establish a niche presence in the field. It's not an evil ploy to create such a niche. The results of this focus. The journal has the highest impact factor as of 2011, the most recent data available, of all the real social work journals. Higher than Social Work, higher than British Journal of Social Work, higher than Social Work Research, higher than Journal of Social Work Education. Something's working here. We have over 7,000 subscribers worldwide. That's huge. We have over 160,000 PDF articles downloaded from the journal's website every year. All SWIR members can get a free subscription to RSWP, and now we have a low-cost open access option. So if you want your article to be open access and published in RSWP, you pay Sage $100. A very, very modest fee, not the thousands of dollars that some other journals charge in the biological and physical sciences. We have open access for a month every year in November. We're pretty good about turning around decisions in 2 months and publication within 6 months of final acceptance, and usually publication online within a month or 2 after final acceptance. And some surveys that have been done, I did them, but I published them, found that the editorial experience of authors of about 20 social work journals, RSWP was really highly rated. He talked about anti-practitioner utterances in research on social work practice, and he referred to his 2011 paper. I carefully reviewed this paper. I've done it several times. I found absolutely no anti-practitioner utterances from the pages of research on social work practice. He does quote Eileen, talking about social workers are bamboozled by false claims in professional journals and textbooks. This is a criticism of the textbooks and the journals, not of the practitioners, it seems to me. He says, structural barriers to practitioner research collaboration are SWIR and RSWP. SWIR is a major outlet for research. There's a thriving qualitative interest group. They meet there. The Journal of Qualitative Social Work meets there. Last year, over 100 social work practitioners earned continuing education by attending SWIR. You know how many attended the National NASW conference in their CE? None, because NASW no longer has a national conference. They gave it up because they couldn't make money, which is a clear sign of incompetence. I mean, you can make money on a conference with 100 people.
What are you talking about?
SWIR is a research organization. It's not the Clinical Social Work Association. We wouldn't expect primary care practitioners to be attending a conference of medical researchers. I'm sorry his SWIR proposals have been rejected. So have mine. Get over it. It happens. Keep trying. The claim, his friends won't submit their work to SWIR or RSWP. Well, we have a wide array of things we publish. Prayer, massage therapy. Monique published a massage therapy in RSWP, for heaven's sake. Psychodynamic psychotherapy, narrative therapy, yogic meditation. Don't tell me that we don't have an array of things that we write about. We do have a narrow focus, outcome studies and psychometric reports, and you know what? Qualitative methods don't lend themselves very well to those types of studies. Qualitative can add in mixed methods format, but that's why there is a hierarchy, because that's a hierarchy of causal inference. It's not a hierarchy of research methods in general. And if you want to make causal inferences, as in outcome studies of social work, yes, indeed, I'm sad to say, RTCs are generally better than quasi-experiments, which in turn are generally better than pre-experiments. Preaching, war dogmatically converted, utterly alienated those it needs to win over. Well, that's sort of anecdotal. I didn't see any data on that. But to not have any direct quotes talking about any practitioner utterances that appear in the pages of RSWP, I don't understand why you would make that statement when it's not to be found in your article. Irwin actually says that CDM is not intended to prove the effectiveness or efficacy of an intervention. Well, that's what RSWP is all about. So are you surprised there's not a lot of CDM in there? Actually, we publish far more quasi-experimental designs than we do RCTs. Case studies, correlational investigations, qualitative inquiry surveys, they're all poorly suited to investigate the issues that RSWP focuses on. They rarely appear within its pages. Utterly alienated? Well, that's a subjective opinion. It's not the circles that I hang out with. How do you explain the readership and impact? Do we favor the gold standard RCTs at the expense of other methods? I wish we had more RCTs. I try and suck up what ones we can, and we simply prefer those because they're a terrific way of having causal inference. Some advice. You don't like the direction of research on social work practice? Start your own journal. They're being established all the time. Establish it the way you like. You don't like SWIR? Start your own organization. New organizations are being started all the time. It's unreasonable to critique successful endeavors in the profession that you have no part of because they're not being run the way you like. Come on in. We're having a ball. Let me see. Oh yes, here we go. My friend Gandhi again. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. Evidence-based practice is winning. Sorry for the acrimonious tone there, but I think it's true. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give the presenter a big welcome and also thank you.